today's program. Thank you.
Hello, and thank you so much for attending today's panel, LA Made from LA to the Moon, the 50th anniversary of the Apollo landing. My name is Anitra Bishop, and I am the archivist at the Columbia Memorial Space Center in Downey, California. We at the Columbia Memorial Space Center are so thankful to both the LA Public Library and LA Made for partnering with us to present this panel to you today. I will start us off today with a few slides which will provide a foundation of information about the Apollo era of aerospace and the aerospace industry in Southern California, as well as provide some context about where and who built the Apollo spacecraft. Serving as NASA's official living tribute to the crew of the 2003 Space Shuttle Columbia disaster, the Columbia Memorial Space Center is located where the Apollo and Space Shuttle spacecraft were designed and built by NASA contractor North American Aviation, later known as Rockwell International. The mission of the Columbia Memorial Space Center is to ignite a community of critical and creative thinkers through world-class programs, events, and engaging exhibits. Our archival collections are comprised primarily of artifacts relating to the creation of the Apollo and space shuttles, with pieces ranging from various spacecraft heat shields to photographs, letters, schematics, ephemera, as well as models of North American and Rockwell space aircraft. Currently on display is our new exhibit, Apollo 11, Building, Living, and Remembering in Spacetown, USA. This is the ecosystem of aerospace in the mid-century Southern California. After proving to be an aeronautic powerhouse during World War II, the mid-century saw California greatly expand into the aerospace industry. This map shows how companies like North American Aviation, Rocketdyne, Lockheed, and JPL created an ecosystem of aerospace. And for those of you who may not be aware where Downey or North American is, it's this big one right here. This photo is the North American Aviation site in Downey, shown here in the late 1960s, or at the height of the Apollo era. It can be kind of difficult to understand just how large this facility actually was during its time. Imagine a property twice the size of Disneyland. It had its own fire department and provided employment to approximately 30,000 workers. You can see here, there we go, is Building 1, which is comprised of approximately 1 million square feet. Just below it is Building 290, which is famous because it's where the final assembly of spacecraft went on. For those of you who may know the area well, this diagonal street up here is Lakewood, and right through here is the Imperial Highway. All that's left of this original facility is a small group of buildings right here. Other than that, it is now a strip mall, a movie theater, and our museum, which is located where the parking lot is, right about there. This right here is a completed North American Aviation product. Both the command and service modules, or the CSM when combined, were designed and built at the Downey site, as well as, not pictured here, the second stage of the Saturn V rocket and the launch escape tower. This photo, taken in 1965, shows a small fraction, no it does not. We got that in order, guys, that's okay. This photo, taken in 1965, shows a small fraction of the Building 1 shop floor. Remember, this whole building took up 1 million square feet of space, and this is just a small fraction where you can see some of the Apollo command modules being worked on. And we're gonna go backwards a little bit. The approximately 30,000 workers who called the Downey site home worked around-the-clock shifts and typically worked a minimum of 52-hour work weeks during the height of the Apollo project. This photo shows the last stop on the assembly line of the Apollo 11 command module. At the Columbia Memorial Space Center, our goal for the 50th anniversary has been to show how impactful and important the work done by individuals and North American Aviation was in relation to the Apollo the Apollo project. These are the people who ensured that our astronauts made it safely to the space, to the moon, and back home again. Please note the diversity of these individuals. Women and men, all ages, all races, all education levels, coming together to triumph. We have a little bit of a change up in our programming today, unfortunately. Ms. Susan Engel, who had a 30-plus year career with North American Aviation, Rockwell and Boeing, was not able to make it. And also, unfortunately, our museum president was also not able to be here. However, we do have a wonderful substitute for him in the more than qualified moderator for you today. Mr. William Pomerantz is the current Vice President for Special Projects at Virgin Orbit in Long Beach, where he's ensuring that the legacy of Southern California's contribution to aerospace continues. Thank you.
No pressure. Well, hi everyone. Thank you very much, Anitra, and to Diane for having us here today. I am really honored to be up on stage in front of you today alongside these awesome individuals and the others that they represent. I'm so excited about this kind of event because even in a year like this one, when so much of our society has been focused on celebrating the 50th anniversary of the first time humans touched down on the moon, it becomes really easy for us to think of that as the story of two individuals, or maybe 2.5 if you count Mike Collins. Sometimes that's how the media perception is, right? You get this idea that Neil and Buzz built all the spacecraft themselves, and they designed the trajectories, and somehow they were at the bottom of the launch stack and lighting the igniters and then climbing up to the top. I had the wonderful fortune of getting to meet all the Apollo crew members, Apollo 11 crew members. They're all spectacular. They're not quite that spectacular. There was a huge workforce all around the nation that was intimately involved in every bit of Apollo and all the things that came before it and all the things that came since it. The other reason I really like to do it, especially at an institution like here at the LA Central Library, is as far as I'm concerned, you cannot tell the story of Southern California without talking about aerospace, and nor can you tell the story of aerospace without talking about Southern California. Just a huge amount of the things that have inspired literally billions of people all around the planet happened, you know, within a short drive from here. Short, at least in terms of distance, if not always in terms of time. And the other nice thing about that, and Anitra touched on this in her opening remarks, you know, the Apollo era certainly didn't have the same view of diversity as we have in our modern society, but anytime you do something in Southern California, I think you're going to take on a little bit more of a diverse workforce than you might have seen or expected just from the pictures. So I'm not going to do lengthy introductions of the three guests we have on stage because actually I want them to do that, and I'll ask them to do that shortly after I impose on Chuck to help me out with my introductory remarks and provide some context for their program. But if I could just quickly give you their names and a tiny bit of their backgrounds, so I'll just go in order. John Perez was a site photographer and a lab photographer who helped working on a variety of parts of the program, including on all the recovery and shakedown of the Apollo capsules as they were finishing each of their missions. Jerry Blackburn was an engineer in the Apollo program and the Space Shuttle program. He is the author of the book Downey's Aerospace History, 1947 and 1999. We were chatting in the green room. I'm hopeful that there's a second volume coming to focus on some of those things. And Chuck Lowry was an engineer also on the Apollo program and the Space Shuttle program. He was responsible for a number of systems across the spacecraft, including a huge role on the parachutes. In fact, if NASA has parachute questions to this day, I think he's still on the short list of folks that get a phone call. Now, as I look out at the audience, I see a few people who I'm guessing know everything about Apollo, and a few of you who not only you weren't alive, maybe even your parents weren't alive when some of this happened. I was going to give a really quick introduction to the Apollo program, but it seems silly for me to do that when I'm on stage with these three gentlemen. So Chuck, you were kind enough to offer to do just a few minutes on what Apollo was before we delve into the specifics of you all's contributions.
Yeah, let me tell you about Apollo. Let's start at the end of World War II, about 1946. Came out of that war, and we were a technical giant within our United States, and we seemed to think that we were way ahead of everybody else. Russia came out at the same time, kind of a beat down place. The Soviet Union I'm really talking about. They took a hard beating in their homeland during the war, and they went into a period of great secrecy. and they were communists, of course, and so here we were allies through the war, but after the war, we really weren't. A lot of distrust, and you've heard the term Cold War. Well, that's how that all happened. Well, there came a time that the United States was going to put a satellite into orbit around the Earth. This was a startling idea that nobody had ever thought of, it seems, and we were on track to do that, and all of a sudden, the Russians, Soviet Union, beat us at our very own game, 1957. And we then came along very quickly. We put some satellites up there too. These are just tiny baseball size, you know, this big. And we were trying to catch up with them, and we were humiliated because they had beat us. Nobody beats the United States. And here we were. So then we're in this space race all of a sudden, and then in 1961, when we were thinking about putting people in orbit, which is another startling idea, the Soviets beat us. Gagarin was launched in 1961. About a month after that, we launched Alan Shepard, our first man in space, but he really didn't go into orbit. He merely went up and down, 15-minute flight, and you know, we thought that was going to be a big deal, but the Russians had already orbited a man around the Earth, so we were really behind in this technology race and the space race, as we now call it. Well, we wanted to catch up, and we were on a track to do that, but we knew that it was going to take years. The Russians beat us and cleaned our clocks for years. They had the first probe on the moon, on Venus. They had the first man in space, the first dog in space, the first woman in space, first extravehicular. They beat us at every turn, clear on up until the late 60s. Well, we're trying to catch up all this time. So when John F. Kennedy announced that we're going to put people on the moon and bring them home safely, the only experience we had was Alan Shepard's 15-minute suborbital flight. So you got to admire John F. Kennedy for having that kind of guts. Now let's talk about him. He was our president. He was trying to recover from an embarrassing situation where some of our CIA people had organized what they called a Bay of Pigs invasion of Cuba and lost, and it was awful, humiliating, and so he was trying to come out of that, and von Braun was one of his close friends. Von Braun was telling him all along, hey, John F. Kennedy, you need to be financing big-time space plans. So Kennedy picked up on that. And he announced in I think it was November of '61, we're going to the moon. So that kicked off this big program that we all talk about as being Apollo. Well, contracts were let. Our company, North American Aviation, was recipient of the big one with the command service module. The Congress was behind us. The public was not necessarily. I'll tell you a little story. When I was invited to come and work on the Apollo program, I was back east in Ohio, and I was in a church setting of some sort, and the leader of our group that was speaking to us says, did you know what our crazy Congress is doing? They're talking about putting people on the moon. How many people believe we're going to go to the moon? Well, my hand went up. And I looked around and nobody else. And my wife was sitting there, her hand didn't even go. So, I mean, that's the way it was. It was a crazy idea. But we worked and we worked hard, and out of all that, you know, it was called the greatest technical achievement ever. Did you know that on the time that Apollo 11 landed on the moon, there was 560 million people watching that on TV around the world? And we launched 6 flights out of White Sands unmanned to test our abort system. We launched 4 unmanned spacecraft out of Florida to test heat shields and aerodynamics. And then we launched 15 manned flights. 4 of those were suborbital. We didn't go to the moon except for Apollo 8 that went around the moon. We didn't land on it. And then we had 6 lunar landings. We had Apollo 13. Everybody knows about Apollo 13. It didn't land on the moon, it went around it. And then we had 3 Skylabs. Nobody knows about Skylabs anymore. They were a small space station that was attached to the Apollo program. Then we had 1 Apollo-Soyuz test project, a joint mission with the Russians. That kind of broke the ice. We were then partners with Russia instead of competitors. And now we have a space station up there that's jointly run by both countries and many countries. That's it.